And we're back for another installment of Inside the Mind of the Sales Rep. And today we're meeting with Jennifer Conrad.
Hi.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
You ready to do this?
Ready.
All right.
Ask away.
Well, as usual, we're going to start at the beginning. Where were you born?
Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
And where did you grow up?
Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Right.
So original.
What did your dad do for a living?
He had a third-party logistics firm, so a transportation company that did transportation all over the United States and internationally. There was trucking and shipping and airline, things like that. So.
And if I'm remembering correctly, your dad was also a lawyer, right?
He was an attorney for a trucking company for a while, and then he started his company in the early 80s. So.
Okay. And how about your mom? Did she do anything for a living? Or?
She was a teacher and then a guidance counselor. So she was early childhood and then a guidance counselor. And then when she had my sister, she stopped working and was a full-time mom.
Just took care of you guys?
Yes, and volunteered a lot and worked really hard at that.
Any siblings?
I have an older sister, Katie. She was 2 grades older than me, so 2.5 years.
Okay. And where was high school for you?
I went to R.J. Reynolds High School in Winston-Salem, and I loved it.
Yeah, that's a big-time high school in Winston-Salem.
It was really fun.
So after high school, what did you do?
I went to NC State in Raleigh, had a great time, and my major randomly in college was landscape horticulture.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting.
It was.
Interesting major for a sales rep.
It was, yeah.
And then how about after college? What field did you get into after college?
After college, I did landscape design for a little bit. I stayed in Raleigh for a year after college, and then I moved to Atlanta. I had lived there one summer during college and knew that I just really loved it, and so I went down there to live there and do some landscape design is what I started out doing.
But then you moved on to something else, right?
I did. I actually got the opportunity to work for my dad's company in the Atlanta area. I started doing sales down there for him, so that was my first legit sales position, was doing third-party logistics sales.
Yeah, and did you do some retail at some point too?
I did. After I worked for my dad for, I wish I could remember now, probably like 6 or so years, I believe. And then I actually worked in a clothing store. I took a break from that and actually was a manager of a clothing store after that.
So that's also customer facing?
Correct.
So you had some sales experience, some customer facing experience.
Yes.
And then how did you get into title insurance?
Well, so after, I lived in Atlanta for about 9 years, and then actually I had a position open up it was kind of a transition time. And so I got a job that brought me back to Winston-Salem, where I actually did medical sales. So I sold post-op orthopedic bracing, so a lot of knee bracing and wrists and ankles and stuff like that. So that brought me back to North Carolina. So that was kind of fun to get into the whole, always when you're doing sales, it's the whole medical sales thing is kind of intriguing. So I did that for several years, traveled a lot for that. It was high demand, high time, kind of had to be very flexible. And while I was doing that, I met one of my really good friends, Landis, who used to be a part of Barrister's Title, and she immediately said, "You would be great at this, you'd love who I work with," and it was just not the right time, and I was not passionate about title insurance at the time, and so pushed that off. But then I got married during this whole process, and then I ended up having my son and took some time off to be with him for a couple of months, and then the spot in Winston-Salem opened up for Barrister's Title.
That's right.
That's how
and that's how we met.
Yes.
And so you went into title insurance.
I went into title insurance.
And so tell me about your previous experience with sales. Your first one was in logistics. And what was that like to go out in the field and doing this job you'd never done before?
It was different. I mean, I would say I'm an extrovert, so I like talking to people, and so I always kind of knew that I would probably be decent at sales. Doing logistics, the fields of sales that I've been in have been fascinating, because in logistics, that is something that makes the world go round. So everybody needs logistics, but it was a lot of cold calling to just see how like what people to learn about people's transportation needs and what they do for that way. And also it's a lot of, for logistics, it's money driven, it's time driven, how quickly you can get things to different places.
Right.
But it was an interesting way to approach sales because it taught me how to cold call, but it also taught me, I think one of my first lessons was people obviously love to talk about themselves, but one of the best lessons was, or best way to get your foot in the door was to call somebody and say, instead of saying, I want to sell you this, I would call and say, hey, I would like to learn about how y'all's logistics works for your work right now. And it was great because I'm not being pushy. I'm not asking them to buy something from us, but it's asking to so you're gathering information and you're really trying to learn more about them. And a lot of times that's when somebody will say where their headaches are, but it's a lot of times when people will just give you a ton of information and you in your mind can think maybe this is where I could help you out, and you're listening, but you can also figure out where you can help people as well. Right. So it's an interesting approach to have somebody just divulge information for you. You take it in and you take it back, and then you figure out how you could fit in.
And how would you say that experience helped you in this title insurance field, which is completely new to you when you started?
I think I was learning a totally different field of a product technically, and so but really trying to learn the industry, so going around and learning about people, but it's a great way to go in, and we are trying to figure out why do you use a certain title insurance company, what is important to you, is it the inside staff, is it the person coming to see you, but really learning how to ask the right questions of how to figure out where we could benefit from them, what to sell to them technically.
And tell me about your processes, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about your logistics also, but in title insurance is tell me about your process. How do you find priors? Who decides who's going to issue the title insurance? So tell me about your process. So oftentimes sales are sales.
Yes, correct.
The field may be different, your knowledge about the product may be different, but talking to people, asking them questions, probably the same.
Yes. Learning about them, learning about their company, that's all the same. Those are all things that you always want to learn in any situation.
And what would you say those first sales calls in title insurance were like for you, if you can remember back?
God, that was so long ago. Intimidating, of course. But, and I fall back on this a lot, but for the first little bit, I really was just trying to get into an office and get to know the people, and just kind of not trying to be too aggressive and saying you've got to try us or whatever, because I was still learning about it too. But getting in there and trying to learn people's names, learning what role they're in, who their decision makers are. But just trying to, my biggest thing in the beginning was trying to figure out the office. What's their dynamic? Who's working there? How many people are working there?
Right.
How many attorneys do you have? Just those simple questions. Are they just doing real estate? Are they doing estates and all that other stuff? But trying to figure out exactly how their office works.
Data mining.
Yeah, totally. And what has helped me then and continuing through, what I've always done is taken lots of notes after I go to offices. I would go in, and as far as me, on my customer sheets, I literally would write down the date, what I brought to them, who I talked to, what we talked about, because no matter, every time you go in there, you'd be like, oh, I'll remember this, and a week later, you're like, I have no idea who I saw, what office I went to, and what we talked about. But that's always been one of my biggest helpful things for myself, is write down notes a lot.
And your 32-year-old brain is not quite like your 42-year-old brain, is it?
Well, mine is now 43, so yes, no, it's not the same at all. Although it has stayed consistent, but.
What role would you say training played into your development into the title insurance selling?
I think obviously training in the aspect of learning title insurance obviously was a huge help. But I think a lot of training just to get ideas, and some things that I think come naturally to one person doesn't come naturally to another person, where something that I might do and it's so obvious to me to do in an office, for somebody that's right next to me, they might never think to take notes, or it's just, they might not ever think to ask all the questions that I ask, but training helps a ton. And I think it's always also important to refresh and kind of rethink through something, because there are things that obviously you don't consistently do over and over again, but like sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I remember when I was doing that, or like, let me focus on this. Yeah.
And to that end, did you spend any time with other sales reps to kind of hear their spiel and the questions they ask?
Yes, I was lucky to get to ride around with the Charlotte and Raleigh reps a couple of times, and it was awesome to see how they were with an office that they knew the people really well and already got a lot of business from, and got to see how they interacted with that person, and then also see them go into an office where they either had like never met the people before, it was a first time call, or it was still a new call, getting to see how you interact, because you pull a little bit of yourself into all of those, but you definitely approach those offices in different ways. So yeah, I did get to do that.
Besides shadowing other sales reps, are any other things you remember doing as far as that initial training experience?
I remember doing that, really trying to learn, and again, I think it's a great refresher, just learning title insurance 101. Like, I still have, every once in a while, I'm like, wait, let me refresh my knowledge of this. That was super helpful. I remember like over the years, like we've done different training things where we've read different books, or still one of the biggest impacts on me was when we were reading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where we each took a different chapter and kind of dove into each chapter and then got to present to each other. And of course, I remember the chapter that I learned the best out of what everybody else reported on, but doing things like that, those are little things that I will carry with me forever. But yeah.
Is there something, well, you may have just mentioned, is there something that really stuck in your mind about the training that you received?
I think trying to, what I learned in that book was like trying to be prepared, trying to anticipate things that might happen or might come up, was something, instead of constantly wandering around trying to put out fires, but trying to anticipate.
Being proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, and being prepared. That was a huge help. Other things I think was super helpful, where I was lucky enough that you rode with me a lot. And that was super helpful, learning from you one-on-one, but also seeing how you interacted with our clients and your knowledge compared to mine. I can be the people person all the time and chat with people, but it was so invaluable having you there to actually really be able to answer questions. That was so helpful.
And maybe give you some history. Like, this person was here and now they're doing this, but they were doing this, and having that history. Is there one bit of advice that you remember getting that really stuck with you, or maybe something you would pass along to a new salesperson as far as advice?
I think advice would be really get to know your customers, so it's not fake. Like, being true to yourself, I think, is super important. Being a genuine person, relating to customers, I think, is huge. That was always really good advice, but make it a general, like, actually relate to them, because I think it's very obvious to people if you're not being true to yourself. So that was really important, but really getting to know the customers, that was huge advice. But then also really trying to pinpoint who is making the decisions as far as title insurance goes, and everything else, but obviously most importantly, who is picking title insurance. It was always the best. It's such a simple advice, but
that's who you're selling to.
Yeah, but it's a basic advice, but it is so important to, because if you don't know who that person is, you're not getting anywhere with anybody. And if not necessarily getting in front of them, but like really learning what role everybody plays in the office was huge.
Could you describe your ideal customer and what makes them ideal for you?
An ideal customer, I think somebody, obviously, like the person that like chooses us every time, of course that's great. Right. But the ideal customer is somebody that's open to a relationship, somebody that's open to try different things. You'll meet a lot of people that or say I already use this person and I'm comfortable with that, but which is great. And like once you have that person in your pocket, that person's fantastic because you are getting a lot of their business. But somebody that's open to try you, I think also ideally for me, which has always been an aspect, like with having you in the office and now Natasha and Sarah in the office, somebody that wants to ask us questions, who wants our help, is such a huge asset, because once they start asking us questions, they realize how great of a group we have here, that they just kind of naturally are using us and naturally want to be calling us and sending us business because they appreciate our help. So I think an ideal customer is somebody that like, they can be a well-versed attorney and been doing it for years and years and years, but it's, if they're still asking questions and they want to create a relationship or kind of a team with us, is like, I love that customer, that because that's such a great, I appreciate being able to be like, no, like these are your resources, use us as your resource. I love that customer.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I used to like younger attorneys, because you could create sort of that mentor-mentee relationship with them. And other people might not be as interested because they're just starting out, they don't have a lot of business. But for me, those were perfect opportunities, because as their business grew, then you were getting all of that business.
Yeah. Well, not like where we did do that, where we would find younger attorneys, but I think the cool thing now is seeing those younger attorneys that are still there 5-8 years later, that are still using us as a resource. I think that's so cool. So you can, it's a, can't teach an old dog new tricks, but like you can still, you don't have to just be a young attorney, but those relationships last forever. And it's amazing the attorneys that still do ask questions, which is great.
Yep. Years ago, we read a book called Take the Stairs by Rory Vaden, and we might have reviewed it more recently. But what is that concept of take the stairs? What does that mean to you, and how have you embodied that concept in your sales job?
So kind of what we were discussing earlier of where it is a, like, I think it's several things. Laying out the tasks at hand that you have and really trying to, it's not the easiest concept, but getting the biggest one out of the way, getting the hardest thing, tackling that first, and then you can go on to the next tasks or whatever. Where I think, well, everybody's different, but I think at some time, like there are times where like every week I'm trying to like lay out my schedule and like what I'm bringing to people, who I need to be talking to, what I need to be talking about. And I think even just laying that out, just so you can figure out what you're trying to tackle for that week or for that month. And there are a lot of times I will try to get the hard things out of the way to do that. And then there are like randomly, like to give yourself some grace. There are some days that you wake up and you're like, I'm not totally looking forward to this day. And I try to think of like, which customers of mine would I love to see today? That would just be not an easy day, but actually like the people that I really thoroughly enjoy seeing. And that sometimes gets me in the mood to like tackle the harder stuff, you know? Or like, or I'll start my day with being like, all right, I'm gonna go see this person because I love them, and I'll get you where you're like, God, I do love doing this. And
then you forget that you woke up in a bad mood, or you didn't feel like it.
Yeah, and sometimes that'll help you tackle the harder things, but it's getting prepared, being ready for the week, making sure you have all your stuff together, and then like really just like going after it and tackling everything.
And what you're describing is the intentionality. And it's one thing to create your schedule and say, I'm going to go through my schedule today. It's another thing to create that schedule and go, for this call, I want to accomplish X, or I want to have this conversation, or I want to ask these 5 questions. You know, that measure of intentionality, I think, is one of the reasons why you've been so successful.
Thanks.
Describe a time when you have felt empathy for a customer. How did you express that empathy, and how did expressing empathy help you with that customer?
Gosh, there's so many times when you're in sales because you're getting to know your customers. So I've felt it in such a gamut of like a frustrating day at work where somebody is so annoyed at the people that they're working around, and they're just really kind of, they actually will randomly just tell you all about it, where you're kind of just taking it all in. And so I've done from that to, I recently had a customer where her father just passed away, and which is heart-wrenching and terrible. But I think what my approach to all of that is to be a listener and to take it in. And one of the best things you can always say to somebody, if they're having a bad day or if they're having a really sad day or whatever, saying I'm sorry is a huge, you want them to know that you're listening to them. And that's just on a human level. I think there are times when it's appropriate to say, gosh, I've gone through a very similar thing. And not necessarily, I mean, death is a totally different thing, but that's a different approach. But it is a lot of times saying, I'm sorry, I hear you, like this must be so rough. It's not a time to like commiserate and really like bash other people or things like that, but it's a great time just to show that you can listen. And then another great thing, not a great thing about it, but it's something that you can do after that. And this is when it's helpful that I take notes after customers. The next time I go back, and if I see that person, you can say, hey, I know you were having a hard time last time. Like, how are you doing this time? And that can be from a bad work day to something happening in your family. Like I have another client, her husband is going through cancer treatment right now. So it is saying, how's he doing this week? And a really good thing also to say is, how are you doing? If people around them are going through a hard time, but also showing I can see you as well, but how are you doing? And is work getting easier? Is like that person that's sick, are they getting better? But also positive things, like you just had a baby, that's so awesome. Like, and then you come back and say, like, what are they doing now? Like, trying to be that.
And it creates this connection between you and the customer. I mean, not only did you remember this thing that had happened that you're commiserating with or talking with them about, but you're human. You're both human, and you're sharing this humanity through a conversation, and it creates this connection between the two of you.
But it's also, as far as like if it comes to a work thing, if they are really frustrated, you can always be thinking in the back of your head, like, is there a way that we as a company could help them out? And you can, maybe you don't have the answer then, but you could come back or email them later and be like, hey, you were saying this is a headache for you. Like, this might be how we can help you out, or let us be a resource. So I think that's helpful.
Another concept we studied in a book that we read is navigating. Dustin Hills wrote a book called Navigate. What is the central concept to navigating?
I mean, that's basically fact finding and trying correct, or that's like basically it's trying to learn, kind of going back to the concept of learning about a company and learning how to navigate through them and learning who does what and who you need to be interacting with. Correct?
Yeah, well, it's more about the measure of your interactions depending on the personality.
Oh, got it. Right. Sorry. So that's right. So navigating, like figuring out what the people's personalities are like. It's easy for me if you're an extrovert, because I can like do extrovert all day and chat with you and talk about it, but also navigating to figure out by looking around somebody's office to see what's on their wall, to see if they're a family person, a sports fanatic, if it's all books, if it gets very plain, like they are very work focused and fact focused. There's not a lot of like fluff around them, but really trying to read the people that you're talking to and figuring out, because you need to bring yourself to who they are, not getting them. I'm not going to bring an introvert to become an extrovert with me and like chat about what vacation you're about to go on.
You can't change them.
No.
But you can change your approach.
Yes, totally.
Depending on the personality of the person that you're talking to.
Yes.
And do you remember what your personality style was?
I was extrovert.
And do you remember what that term was that Dustin Hills used?
No.
Entertainer?
Yes, I am an entertainer.
You're an entertainer? And so do you find that when you come across other entertainers that they're easier to talk to for you?
For sure. That's the entertainer, and then there was one other one that it makes it easier for you to talk to. But yes, of course, like an entertainer, yes, because we just want to talk and have fun. And it's being bringing the fun and the excitement and the positivity and all of that, which is it's so fun. But I think
But a detective or a counselor, do you take that same approach with them?
not at all. Like for the counselor to detective, like they're the person that like they want to know that you're there to help them. They want to know that you're there to help their team. They want to know numbers. How many people do you have working on this? What is your inside staff like? It is all numbers. How quickly can you do things like that? It is not a like, tell me about this person or
your weekends.
Yeah, they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
They just want to talk about work. So, which is fine. As a salesperson, you should be able to get on that person's level, not your level, but like get to where you need to learn. That's why you want to learn about everybody, is to learn how you want to be interacting with them. Because if I was going to a person that was a detective and I was entertaining them, they could have cared less, and that's a waste of a sales call.
They might be like, why are you in here bothering me and my people?
Yeah, you're taking up my time.
They want to know facts, numbers, tell me stuff. How are you going to help me?
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about your weekend.
Yeah.
And do you find yourself still doing that out in the field? Is looking at your environment and noticing this and that and what it might mean?
For sure. I do that a lot still. I do think I am a relationship person, so I like will still, even if I like, one of my like I said earlier, one of the biggest things I have learned in sales, and it's such a simple concept, but people love talking about themselves. Even if they are a detective or whatever, you can still like you want to get the conversation around to them talking about them. But also, so that's something I still always try to do with people no matter what, but I will still constantly look around an office and try to figure out what they're doing. Are they like, and you also need to be able to learn how to read people. If you're in there seeing somebody and they are still typing away, like they do not want to take the time to talk to you right now. So you do very quickly, hi, how's it going? You might want to try to touch on one or two things or ask a couple of questions, but it is like quick, get out. And that is reading people. But also at the same time, it's kind of funny. There's one time that somebody's like that, and the next time you might see them, it might be a slow day or something, and they're in
different
the chat.
mood.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But it is constantly trying to read people.
I've told you this before. One of the things I think you do as good as anybody I've come across is ask questions. Mm-hmm. And you do this with me. Mm-hmm. You'll ask me questions, and it makes me relate myself to you. Mm-hmm. It makes you likable when you're asking me questions about myself, and I get to tell you about what's going on in my life or experiences that I've had, mm-hmm. and it creates this connection, and I think you were really, really good at that.
Thank you.
And it's something that a lot of people can learn from, is how you approach your customer and people in general.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
If you could give me like one or two of your value propositions when you're out in the field, what are you talking about as far as what you bring to the table, what your team brings to the table?
I constantly, obviously, am asking, like, trying to figure out what's happening in their company, like whether or not they're busy or not. Because if they're not busy, it's silly to be like, I just need 5 more orders from you if they don't have the 5 orders to give you. Like, there's no. So I really am constantly trying to get a feel for like what is happening in their office right now. Are they slammed? Is it really slow? I think that's really helpful. If I've seen that we've had an order from them, it's great to go in and say like, how did it go? How can we improve? Something that I always tell people, like, obviously we like to get good news that we did an amazing job, but also we want to know if things did not go as well, how we can improve on our relationship with them, are 2 different things that I really try to kind of approach. And those are 2 main things, and really I do constantly try to learn more about my customers, of where they're coming from, and but yeah, just getting a feel for what's happening inside of their organization. It gives you a great idea of what's happening in the market. It gives you a good idea, like if they say they're like slammed and you're not getting anything, that can be a sign that maybe we're not doing something correctly, I'm not doing something correctly. So asking those questions constantly.
And you said this earlier, a lot of the times those questions are designed to figure out if there's something that you can give to them that's going to help them, which is the hallmark of a good salesperson. No matter what industry you're in, as a salesperson, your job is to bring value to that customer. And so by asking the questions, you're trying to figure out, how can me and my team bring value to this person?
Yeah.
And that is something that you also do very well, is asking those questions to figure out, like, oh, well, you know, you should talk to Sarah, or you should talk to Natasha, because they know about that, or they can help you with that.
Yeah, it's great to have people that, and we do have that, where you have access to people that you can ask questions, a constant, especially if you're in a smaller firm, if it's just one or two attorneys. If it's two attorneys, you can always say, if so-and-so's out of town, don't forget to, like, and you have a question, please call Sarah and Natasha. They can answer your questions for you. They can be that sounding board for you. If it's a person that's a one attorney office, they need somebody to bounce ideas off of, or have a sounding board. And so that's such a great thing to sell, to say, you have access to these people.
Yep. We mentioned scheduling earlier. How important is scheduling to your process?
It's pretty important. I don't necessarily stick to exactly the schedule I do, but every week I try to come up with, like, who do I want to see this week? And I will write down, like, I'll try to fit into my schedule. And some days you can see 5 people, because there are weeks when people are chatty Cathy and you're talking to them. Or they're randomly one day where all of a sudden you've seen 8 people on that day. So I try to have, I try to be prepared for the week. I try to, go into every day. Like, if I can squeeze in an extra person, I have this stuff on me that I could squeeze in an office or 2 or whatever. But also not get so down on myself if I didn't get to see everybody I saw that day. But I think it's so nice to come up with a schedule and say, like, all right, I'm going to try to, be in, I have different areas of my territory, but, be in Winston this day, High Point this day, whatever. But sometimes I've seen everybody in High Point that I needed to see. It happened to me yesterday, and I was driving back to Winston, and so I squeezed in one more person in Winston on my way back. So it's great to sometimes get to check off that extra person. But
And do you create that schedule on a particular day?
I usually try to create stuff on Mondays, and there are times, I'll try to make my schedules on Mondays, and if I'm all ready, I'll go out and see customers that day. A lot of times Mondays I'll create my schedule. I'll also, if I'm doing depending on what I'm giving to my clients that week, if I need to package stuff, I'll try to do that day. Sometimes I'm doing that at night after my kids go to bed, whatever. But yeah, I try to really get stuff in on a Monday.
And do you handwrite the schedule, or do you?
I just put it in. I have a form in my computer that I've filled in for the past several years. That
like a spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just put them by customer or by region?
Yeah. And then also, so you also know, because sometimes when you're setting up lunches, or if you have a specific time, so you can remind yourself, oh, I have lunch with this client in Greensboro on Wednesday at noon, or whatever, that helps.
Do you have a favorite question you like asking to a repeat customer, someone you've seen before over and over again?
I mean, I think the reason, it's you constantly saying, how are we doing? Or I think a good question is to ask, why do they keep on using us? How are we benefiting them? What's making them coming back to us? So, and it's 9 times out of 10, it's our customer service and our access to the underwriting staff and everything. But asking, what did we do well?
Yeah, and that's interesting, because you're getting feedback, which is good, whether it's positive or negative, but you're also getting the customer to articulate why they like you, right?
Yeah.
Out of their own mouth, out of their own words, and it's this reminder, yeah, we're good, right?
Yeah. Thank you for using us. Or look, also a fun thing to, if you have gotten a lot of orders from somebody, because it's nice to boost their ego as well, to be oh my gosh, y'all had a great month, y'all must be so busy and crushing it, and that's kind of a fun thing to go into an office and say, and so it's fun to do stuff like that.
How about a prospect, right? So somebody you don't have that relationship with. Is there one question that you particularly like to ask, or is a go-to question?
I like to ask, if you're talking to the right person, that is the person choosing title, asking what is important to you. Is it speed? Is it access to a whole bunch of different priors? Is it the underwriting counsel? But what is important to you is such a great question to ask. It's blunt, but it's also, and you hope they're being honest, but hopefully you get a good answer out of them, so it gives you an insight to that person.
Well, it sounds like there's one question before that you might ask a prospect is, who decides title here?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you remember the concept of an anchor? Do you remember that concept? Having an anchor with somebody?
Mm-mm.
So an anchor would be like something you always go back to, that you've talked about in the past, and you just know. So do you have any anchors with anybody that you can tell us about?
Well, now that, yes, after doing this for 8+ years now, I have a lot of anchors with a lot of different people, and it could be from somebody's son who is a runner at NC State right now. How's he doing? Like, what is that? Or somebody that loves to travel. Where are you going? Or a lot of, and it's kind of funny, the people now, I like to read a decent bit, and learning the people that like to read. It's funny because I can go up to somebody, or I even went in the office the other day and they're like, tell me something good that you're reading, because they're like, I need a new book. Or so it's finding those little things. It's learning about that, learning if somebody has a grandkid. I do not have grandkids, but like, we can talk about grandkids. You just those little tidbits about a person is so much fun to learn about. And sometimes I could care less about what our anchor is, but like, it's showing that I'm interested is the most important thing.
Right. And again, that you remembered. You remembered that thing about them.
Yeah. But it was, is it a TV show that we all watch, or what? It's just, is there a sports team that they're interested in? But like,
and it's that connection, right? Even though, like you said, I may not really be into college football, but we're talking about that, and it's a connection that I have with that person. If
it excites you, I'm gonna seem genuinely that I'm somewhat excited about it.
Do you have canned conversation starters, like in your head somewhere? Like, I'm gonna ask them about, what books they're reading, for example. Do you have any of those, or it just comes naturally to you to talk to people?
I think it's both. I mean, I was laughing the other day with somebody. If I had somebody writing with me every single day, by the end of the day, a couple of times they'd probably be like, if you bring up the weather one more time, I'm gonna start crying. Like, because there are those days that it's rainy, or that it just snowed, or it's hot or something, and you go in there and like, woo, the heat, it's a lot, whatever, and then like 20 minutes later you walk in the next office and you're like, woo, the heat, it's hot. Like, I mean, it's just, you're saying stuff like, so yes, there are plenty of days, there are plenty of times when it comes naturally and I automatically am like, oh my gosh, hey, how's, like, whatever is going, and I can think of something individually. But there are lots of days where, like, the interest rates right now are high, so you can go in there and be like, isn't that wild that we had refinancing this week, like, coming up with different topics like that. So I'm not saying the same thing every day, but it changes, but you kind of, I'm not talking about politics, I'm not talking about church, but I can talk about coming up with something that everybody can kind of relate to. And
it sounds like you spend some time thinking about what that could be on a particular day.
Yeah, because I mean, when COVID was happening, we were all, I can't tell you how many times we had that conversation of like, aren't we lucky that real estate is booming right now? And that was a constant conversation of like, this is crazy. This is such a busy time. And now we're in kind of the opposite time. And so it's a lot of like, are you slow? Everybody else is slow. Like, talking about, so you think about it and it changes all the time. But you have canned conversations.
Okay. Do you spend any time on self-improvement? And if so, what sorts of things do you do to be better at your job?
I think self-care is important. Like, I love to exercise and I have kids, and so approaching a career with a family is something that I wasn't used to prior to this job. So trying to have some work-life balance, I think, helps, and so that you can focus on several things, but therefore if you're happy in other aspects of your life, that helps you in work. And it also helps you have conversations with people of different things going on, so you're more of a so you're not just talking about work, or you have other hobbies or things like that. But that also makes me excited about working and excited about seeing my customers and asking questions.
You remember the gratitude thing you used to do?
I did do
Yeah.
that for a short
You did?
minute, where I
That's
tried
good.
to write down like 3 things every day what I was grateful for, and that was a challenge and
Yep.
fun.
But
and,
in your attempt at some sort of self-improvement,
absolutely.
do you do any debriefing with yourself? So let me describe that. At the end of the day, look back, think about all the visits you made, and think, man, I really nailed that. I got to do that again. Or that was such a great answer I gave. Or the opposite, like, boy, I really just dropped the ball on that in that one visit. Do you ever do any of that?
Oh, for sure. And a lot of times, like, so I do, for each customer, I have their own individual sheet for each office. And a lot of times, like I was saying earlier, I'll write down like the date and what I brought and what we talked about. And so that's kind of like my debrief, like, so that I remember those things. But then also I'll put on there like next time, as simple as bring envelopes next time, or I forgot to ask like about this person, I needed somebody's email address or randomly, but I'll write down little notes so that before the next time I go in, so I can debrief and like get everything out of my mind and put it on paper. But also, so the next time before I walk into there, I'll say, oh yeah, I need to do this. Or like I'll sometimes write down like ask them about this question, you know, like so it'll help me trigger my memory again right before I walk in. But also, yeah, to kind of think about like what went well, what didn't go well. Yay, I got this little piece of information that I've been meaning to ask them. Like, even it can be even as like, how many people are in your office? Where the other day I thought there were like 12 people in the office, and the other day I was like, how many? Because they keep on hiring people, and I was like, how many people are you up to? And they're like, we're up to 17. And you're like, oh my gosh, thank God I asked you that.
Yeah.
Like, so I can figure that all out. But
And when you say you like making handwritten notes, what do you do with those handwritten notes? Anything?
I keep them in a folder. I have it with me, but I keep them in a folder, and I keep it like very organized by like the town that they're in. And the folder says like pretty much who the attorneys are, who the front desk person's name is, who the paralegal is, what their address is, how many people are in the office, if they drink alcohol, if they don't drink alcohol. Like, it's all these notes, and I keep them all in a folder so that when I know who I'm going to see, I keep all those sheets with me so I can go through them.
So you have your notebook with you. How important is it to you to have an accountability partner? Somebody to kind of hold you accountable for?
I think it's important. I mean, I think the nice thing about sales is that can be flexible. It's a lot of, you're doing a lot on your own. The funny thing about being in sales though is that for the most part we're all kind of somewhat of an extrovert-ish person. And then the funny thing is I'm not in an office with a bunch of people. Like, I'm on my own a lot, which it can get a little lonely. But I think it's important to have somebody at the office having expectations of you so that you're reaching them, and have somebody that you can ask questions to or talk to about.
Yeah. Do you set goals for yourself?
Kind of. Yeah. I try to, life is hectic right now, so I kind of tend to do more short-term goals. And I also feel like kind of the market is so kind of wonky over the past couple of years. It's been kind of hard to say,
to set number goals.
To set that, but like setting how many people I'm going to try to go see, how many offices I'm going to consistently do this for. So I'll try to set goals like that for myself. But
And does it motivate you when you set a goal? To try to meet it.
I do. Where like at the end of the week, I'm like, I just saw all those people I wanted to see. Or
and it also gives you that sort of positive feeling, right? You can put your self-esteem in your efforts, and not necessarily in your numbers, because like it or not, you don't always control how your numbers come out.
Correct.
But you can control, I'm going to see X amount of people. You can control that.
Because then also you'll randomly show up in an office and like the person that you might need to talk to is at lunch or something. Like, you're not always guaranteed to see every single person that you need to see. But yeah, setting goals of being like, I'm going to go see everybody in this area today and get in front of these people. But yeah, I like setting goals like that.
In what ways do you acknowledge inside staff's contributions, and why would you say that's important?
I think it's important because the inside staff here works way harder than I probably ever will. They are the ones that I tell people from doing sales over the years, it's so fun doing this sales job because I'm not competing on price necessarily at all. What I'm bringing to the table is relationships I'm creating with the offices and our customer service. And without, the most important one of that is our customer service. And it is such a gift to get to go into an office and be confident that our customer service is outstanding and the people working in the office are working as hard as they possibly can and really producing really good product. So that's like the icing on the cake. Like, that is so key to us. So making sure that the inside staff knows that I appreciate them, that we all appreciate them, because they are working very hard. So constantly like sending like thank you, being grateful, trying to like bring treats in if you can or whatever. Just constantly showing gratitude towards them is huge because they're working hard.
Yeah, and as salespeople, I think we tend to focus on the baubles, right? The times when they don't make us look good, but those are really far and few between and outnumbered by the times they make us look great.
Oh yeah.
And so it's important that they know that they get that feedback.
Yeah, they're answering the hard questions and they're doing all the hard work, and I'm putting time in, but I'm not doing what they're doing. It's so impressive. But letting them know that I think it's impressive and that I'm grateful is huge.
In what ways do you engage in prospecting? So by that I mean looking for new entrants into the field and finding out about who the new attorneys are, who's doing deals, etc.
How do I do it?
Yeah, how do you go about it?
Word of mouth is a way that's always happens. Like you'll randomly hear somebody saying like, oh, I work with this attorney in some real estate thing. Asking abstractors who they work with is a great way to kind of figure out who the other attorneys are around town, who has a good reputation, who works hard. That's a lot. Like that's another way of doing it. And then sometimes what happens every once in a while is like people branch off into a new office or switch to a different office. And I think that's kind of staying on top of where people are is key and helpful. And a lot of times, like if you have an attorney that switches to a different office, that's a great way to put your foot in the door if that's an office you haven't been to. That's a great way to go visit that person and kind of try to learn about that one.
And until she moved, your sister was a real estate agent in your neck of the woods. And how having a relationship with a real estate agent, in this case your sister, how does that help you understand what's going on in the marketplace?
I think it's interesting when you do know people in real estate of who they think are really good attorneys. That's so fascinating to hear. Who do they like working with? Because that word gets around very quickly, or who they don't like working with, or who they think an office is running smoothly. Is a good thing to know and learn about, because then you can kind of gauge how busy that office is, or who to be talking to, or what you could get out of that office. And where there are plenty of offices where they'll say there's a lot of turnover there, and that's kind of a little volatile, and trying to figure that out. And
bit of a red flag.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so kind of giving you some intel about the various players in the industry. Do you use prior policy data, and if so, how do you use it?
I do. I try to, it's I think an impressive thing to tell offices or to discuss with an office is how many prior policies we've found or looked up that past month. It shows them that people think we're doing a good job if we found a ton. Like it shows them that other offices think that's a good aspect of us as well. Not every office, title insurance company offers people that just look up prior policies. So that's always been a big thing that's just an added thing that we provide or that we offer to companies. And that's a huge thing to brag about, because without a prior policy on a lot of things like that, prior policies lead to orders. And that's something that you want to show people that that's something that we can find for them.
Do you have any favorite closing words? words you like to say as you're leaving to kind of, get some business?
I think it's fun to say, like, I look forward to working with you when you're meeting somebody new. I think a lot of things, other things that I do, not in front of an office or whatever, but like if I'm doing a admin day, a lot of times either like the beginning of the month or the middle of the month or the end of the month, I'll shoot out emails, because there's sometimes that you'll realize you're like, I will touch so many people today if I just email all of my customers today, rather than trying to make it to all these different offices. But kind of doing a mid-month check-in email, or at the end of the month, close to the end of the month, where it's last week of the month, where it's interesting, and it doesn't work on everybody, but it's interesting to say, like, hey, like, thank you for the orders already, thank you for the orders from last month, whatever. This month so far, I have like one order from you, or I don't have any orders from you, and saying, we really enjoy working with you. Like, if you have anything that you can send our way, we would really appreciate it. Like, we would love the opportunity to work with you this month is another good thing to say to people. And because it's not what you've always said, it's not the attorney's office's job to remember how many they've sent to us that month or that year or whatever. And sometimes if you make people aware of it, they always go like, oh my gosh, or like they'll say, you're next on my list. Or I even like, luckily I have a client that he says, what is your goal for me this month? And I can send him that number, and a lot of times he'll really try to hit it, or I'll send him a higher number than what my goal is and hope that he'll hit that number. But having those conversations, kind of just showing people, like, they don't want you to think that all you're doing is checking to see how many they're sending and checking numbers constantly, but it's okay to remind them every once in a while, like, oh my gosh, thank you for these orders, or like, please send us anything. We haven't gotten to work with you yet. And they're like, oh shoot, I forgot. I think that's a great conversation to have.
Yeah, like you said, it's not their job to keep track, it's yours.
Yeah.
And so sometimes just giving them that information will result in
It's a fine line, because I've had some offices say, like, this other title insurance company told me that, like, they sent back 20 priors and I sent them 2, or like, they don't want you to come across nagging, but it's okay to kind of do a gentle-ish, harder reminder.
Yeah.
Honesty is helpful.
Well, speaking of closing, we're at the close of our interview, and I've got 10 questions for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Where is a place that you would want to live?
The beach, anywhere.
Where is a place you would not want to live?
Somewhere where it is gray and dreary and dark.
What is something that makes you happy?
Friends and my family.
What is something that makes you sad?
Other people being sad. What makes me sad? I don't love change. So that kind of makes me sad. Just being, stressful, sad, like, just sad things, like death, obviously, but I don't know, like, people moving, that makes me sad.
Okay. What is a sound or noise that you love?
I do think hearing a kid giggling is such a cute noise, or hearing, and it's somewhat rare, but when I can hear my kids chatting with each other in a nice way and they have no idea that I'm around, it is like, again, it's very few and far between, but that can be pretty darn cute.
Baby's giggling might be fine too.
It's really awesome.
How about a noise or sound that you hate?
Nails on a chalkboard, my kids arguing, I hate, but any like high pitched noise.
What's a guilty pleasure for you?
Traveling, exercising, just relaxing and hanging out with friends and my family, like, and my husband.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think it would have been fun to be like a reporter or a talk show host kind of person, like a reporter.
Reporter, okay. And how about a profession that you would not like to do?
obviously probably anything in like the trash industry. I would not be a great waitress.
Okay. If you could have dinner with any person, dead or alive, who would that be?
That's a great question. I would say probably all of like the fun family, like when you think of like your childhood, like our Christmases or holidays were always fun and wild and like rambunctious. Just if you could just have that conversation with all of those family members again, I think would be so much fun, especially the ones that passed. But being as an adult, like actually to be a part of like the real conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, that has been another episode of Inside the Mind of the Sales Rep. Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back for another episode soon.